This happened to me a very long time ago, and is something that I still have trouble sharing. I felt like I needed to share this here because no one I have ever told in real life has believed me at all. They also give me really weird looks and call me crazy. And do you know what the worst part is? I would do the exact same thing if I was put in their position. I don't have any proof, and so all I can really give you is my word. This actually happened to me in the late 1980s when I had just turned 18 years old. I was a pretty quiet kid, but I was starting to break out of my shell once I was free from the shackles of high school. I was bullied a lot, but that's not really necessary to know for this story. I didn't really make a lot of friends in school, if you could not already tell, so I spent a lot of my time at home or with family. I was getting tired of them, if I'm being honest, because I could not have a day of peace without nagging or belittlement. I get it. I was unemployed and did not have the most prospects in the world, but I was trying. I was working myself up to walk into stores and trying to get a job, but my nerves always just got the better of me. They told me that I was not trying hard enough when I would get rejected, and then they would make fun of me, telling me that no one wants to hire a nerd, that no one wants to hire someone who dresses like they look gay, telling me that I look disabled and how I would never get a job. It didn't exactly do very much for my confidence, if I'm being honest. And I just had to take it. I had to take it on the chin, because I was under their roof and I did not have a job. I lived with both my mom and my dad, and also my little sister, who was around 16 years old at the time. I had taken to exploring nature to try and de-stress and get away from everyone. It was the only time I ever had a second to sit down and look at my life objectively from far away. I would walk and make plans or conjure up ideas for how I was going to act at my next job interview or what kind of skills I would work on next. I would legit walk deep into the dense woods with no one around for miles and just sketch and practice my artwork or just write whatever creative fiction idea I had on my mind. It brought me peace. I never camped out there though. I'd stayed until around midnight before because I lost track of time and I had to rush back home, but the whole camping deal was not for me at all. Fast forward to the day that all of this just went wrong. It just seemed like a normal, sunny summer day, but the second that I hit those woods, it was like my body just knew that something was off. I just felt weird. I was actually getting this really horrible feeling of deja vu, like I had already walked through a certain part of the woods before, just moments prior. It's pretty weird because thinking back on it, my memory now, it's like time keeps having these short gaps and jumping forward. I remember walking and then suddenly I'm a lot further ahead than I was just a second ago. But there was not a noticeable jump for me in my perception and in my vision. It was like I was walking past tree A, and then there's like a seamless transition and my brain does not pick up on anything, and all of a sudden I'm walking past tree D instead of tree B. I remember actually walking past a certain tree, and I knew I already had because it had a mark on it. You know when couples scratch a heart in their names into the bark of a tree? I walked past one that said something like James plus Jennifer or something like that, and then 10 seconds after I did, I walked past the exact same tree once again. Only now, I could see that there were already tracks laid out in front of me. These were not from another person. With how deep into those woods that I was, there was not another person around for miles, and I would have heard any little sound. I definitely would have noticed someone. Not to mention, my shoes fit into these prints perfectly. I had already walked here somehow, but I knew for a fact that I had not turned around or changed direction at all. It really creeped me out. It just got weirder and weirder from there, but it's hard to describe it properly with how messed up my memory is. I remember walking for some time, and then suddenly, there's a blank spot in my memory. And all of a sudden I am sitting down on my ass, and my jeans are just covered in dirt and filth, mostly around the knee area though. It looked as if I had been rolling around in mud and dirt, and it actually looked seeped in. I was not sitting in my usual spot, and so I got up and walked further ahead, and it was like I just did a circle. There were footsteps behind me and in front of me, and there was something that I noticed by a tree. It was the sweater that I was wearing. I wear sweaters in the summer because I'm weird, and I don't like to have my arms exposed, don't judge me. But it was all folded up by a tree with my shoes on top of them. They were both identical, but I was still wearing my sweater and my shoes, so that could not be right at all. I tried to just dismiss the weirdness as a lack of sleep and me going crazy due to all of the stress in my life. I got to my usual spot in a really small clearing with some nice wooden logs that I could sit on. I dusted myself down, and then I sat on one of the logs to begin brainstorming. Something just overcame me, and I started zoning out really hard, but it was like I wasn't really aware of it. It was like time just passed by. I had my Walkman with me, and I was actually listening to Life's Rich Pageant by R.E.M. because it was one of my favorite albums, and I just really like to listen to music that I was familiar with because it helped me to pass the time and get into the right mindset to be really creative. I did not have the music on too loud, so I could still hear my surroundings pretty well. There was not much sound going on in the woods that day anyway, aside from the occasional gust of wind rattling the branches. One second I was sat just looking at my page and wondering what on earth I should sketch today. The next second, I realized that half of the album had gone by and I already had a pretty rough outline on my page. I had sketched part of the scene right in front of me. On the page, I had sketched the bits of forest jutting out and the almost circle-like enclosure of trees around me in kind of like a semicircle, as well as a slight hint of blue just peeking out over the trees in the distance. I tried to refocus myself, but I completely lost my place. I had switched from autopilot to manual, and I could not figure out what I was doing. I realized that I was mindlessly shading a face. I had sketched the vague outline of a person standing in the tree line. There was no one there in real life. In my sketch, they were just barely visible. They were around 6 feet tall, and you could just see their shoulders over the top of an outstretched branch. It could not have been me that I was sketching. That would not have made sense. Even if I wanted to put myself in the drawing, I was not that tall. I thought I was just maybe being silly and got the wrong idea. This is where things really took a turn for the worst though. I heard the sound of what sounded like something traipsing through leaves and getting caught on things. It was definitely a person, because I could hear them whispering, "shit," whenever they brushed past something. At first, I kinda shit my pants a little, because my mind immediately jumped to animal. And then once I heard it was a person, my mind jumped to, what if this person is up to no good? But my anxiety settled down when I saw that it was a bearded man wearing some type of backpack. He stepped out of a dense bush a few feet upwards of me, and then he stopped, patted himself down, and then he looked in my direction. I shot him a quick and kind of awkward wave, and I hit him with a, "Good day for hiking, huh?" I was just trying to break the horrible silence. And he stared at me for an uncomfortably long time with a blank look on his face, before his expression really quickly changed to one of shock and then recognition, and he stumbled out a, "Yes, good," while raising his hand upwards at the same time. It was like he was on some kind of a delay. I figured that maybe he might have some kind of mental disability, because when he raised his hand, he did not even wave. He raised it up about halfway, jerked it back down a little, then raised up a fist, and then it was like he had to think to actually manually unfurl each finger, and then he finally moved it from side to side. I chuckled really nervously for a second, and I told him, "Hope the rest of your walk is good. See ya." You know, to kinda politely move him on and let him know that I was not down for company or a chat. But he took this as an invitation to take a few steps towards me, which worried me. He was leaning down and out to the side, like he was trying to get a good look at me and what I was doing. He stuttered again, like he was struggling to form the words that he was saying, and he said, "You help me? A bit lost. I'm a bit lost. I need help." His speech seemed to get better the more that he talked. He seemed to become more coherent as time went on. He kept going on, asking me if I had a map or if I knew the area. He told me he was lost. I told him that I knew the area well, and I asked him where he was trying to go. He stared at me blankly, like he was trying to think of somewhere on the spot, and then he just said, "I'm going home." I gave him vague directions for the way out, back the way he came, and he started asking me if I would come with him and show him where to go. I told him no because I had things to do, and it was not a short walk. It was at this moment that I really took notice and started paying attention. Because, come to think of it, this man was not dressed to hike at all. For a start, he was wearing a set of sandals that looked like they had been pried out of a trash can. They looked like they would give you an infection. They were that old and moldy. The bag he was wearing on his back looked a backpack. It had now fallen down and was slung down onto his shoulders, and it was not a hiking bag. It was more like a messenger bag, a brown one. Only, that looked kinda dirty too, and it had things hanging out of it. There was literally part of a roll of toilet paper that was unraveled down the side of the bag, just flapping in the wind. I asked him if he was a hiker, because that's what I initially assumed, and he paused before saying yes. I made a quick joke about how he wasn't really dressed for hiking, and he seemed to get really defensive, and he started telling me how he had hiked all over the country. His English was becoming more broken again. He told me I had to show him, and I again told him no. He stepped closer to me, and I told him to keep away from me and that I was leaving. I started picking up as many things as I could comfortably carry, and I got up to my feet, and I decided to walk a different way, a shortcut where I knew this guy would get lost for sure and not be able to follow me the whole way. He walked after me for a little while down it, shouting after me and calling out, "Hey, come back, I need help." And then at one point, his voice just sounds really different. It went from really soft and almost innocent sounding, as innocent as a grown man can sound anyway, to a lot more gruff and like really masculine. And he just called after me, "Don't make this any harder than it needs to be." I owned a firearm, but I did not like to use it. I only learned how to shoot and carried it with me because my father forced it on me. It was a Ruger GP100 and I had it concealed. I pulled it out and I warned him to stay away, otherwise I would be forced to hurt him. My state does not have a stand your ground law, so even though I had adrenaline flowing, I was worried about getting something wrong and being in big trouble. Like I said, I was barely an adult and I did not have much real-world experience at the time. I did not want to ruin my life before it even started because of some weirdo. He was not in sight at this moment. He had stopped following me, so I was continuing to walk backwards, but I had my gun out ready and prepared. I heard rapid, heavy footsteps coming from in front of me, and I was already aiming and ready for this guy. If he was going to continue to run towards me, I had no choice. But I never stood a chance at all. I was suddenly tackled from behind with a lot of force, and the surprise of it caused the gun to go flying out of my hands. I felt a heavy pressure on the back of my neck. He was gripping it with his hand, and it felt like he was digging his nails in, but at the same time, he was hitting me with something really heavy. It took only a few seconds before I felt really dizzy, and like all of the fight had been taken out of me. I felt like I just wanted to vomit and pass out. I felt my vision spinning and like I was going to throw up. I was laying face down on the ground in the leaves by that point, and then I felt myself being dragged across the ground. It actually burned to have some of my raw skin pulled over the ground like that. I don't know how long I was dragged for or where to. Everything was still spinning and blurry, and everywhere just looked the same. I knew that my hands were restrained by something, but I never saw him do it, or felt him do it, for that matter. He eventually lifted me up slightly and turned me around and sat me up by a large tree. He did not even flinch or strain one single bit. It seemed effortless for him to move me around. This next part is the absolute weirdest of all because he started touching me and then he started changing. I still cannot explain it all of these years later. He'd stopped acting so awkwardly by this point. I tried to slur out some sentences like, "Please stop," and "Let me go home," but it sounded like I was drunk when I said them. I noticed that I had big cuts all down my exposed arms, which I figured was from being dragged across the ground. But he was leaning over me and just looking me up and down, sometimes bending down and lifting up my shirt or touching my leg. He spent a long, long time doing this before eventually he just, I don't know. It was imperceptible at first, but my mind knew that something was really wrong. It was like his height had changed. He looked shorter, but it was so hard to see. I only really noticed when I saw parts of the skin on his exposed legs becoming a little bit more flappy and like it was hanging off, like the skin was too loose and there was too much of it now. And then I saw him physically grab these bits of skin that were too big and I'm not sure. He pulled them taut, and they almost seemed to change. His skin seemed to get tighter when he did this, and I could no longer notice the loose bits of skin. I remember that while he was doing all this, that he bent down, and he took his finger, and he physically placed it onto my eyeball. I tried to close my eye, but he ripped it open and pried it open with his hands, and he touched my pupil, and it was the worst burning feeling I had ever felt in my entire life. And while he was doing this, with my eye that was not on fire and being fondled, I could see his eye start to change. It was like I saw this little shimmer, and it was almost this mirage-like thing. And then I very slowly saw the hue of his eye change, from green to brown, just like mine. I saw the eyeball actually physically constrict itself to look smaller. I saw the veins pop and stress and I don't know, it was vibrating. When it did this, it looked as if it was shaking or spasming, and it looked immensely painful. When these things would happen, the man would scream really horribly, like it hurt him. Just these raw, guttural screams that still sounded vaguely human. I noticed that there was sweat pouring off of his forehead and dripping down onto me. All the veins in his body looked like they were really stressed and at maximum capacity. He continued to do this again and again. He removed my shirt entirely, and even my pants eventually too. He would place his hand, and then I would watch his skin twitch and stretch or sometimes even constrict, and then he would let out these screams and he would look like he was in immense pain. It looked at times as if parts of the skin had been pulled too thin, and it looked like the skin was about to split. It sounds like I'm talking out of my ass, but after all of this was done, the man standing in front of me did not look like that hiker anymore. He looked like me. I don't know how much time passed by while all of this happened, but it felt like hours, and the sun was a lot further down in the sky by this point. He didn't look exactly like me. There were tiny little things that were just off. I couldn't describe them, but looking at him, they jumped out at you, even if you couldn't consciously say them out loud. He spent a little more time looking me up and down and touching me. It was like he was trying to make sure he got it exactly right. After that, I don't really remember all that much. I remember being dragged away again. I remember hearing the rustling leaves, and then I remember the muffled voice of someone that sounded like they were talking to themselves. When I finally woke up again, I was gasping for breath, and when I inhaled really sharply, I got a mouthful of leaves that I almost started choking on. Literally, I felt one enter my mouth and almost go down my throat. I still remember how rotten they tasted, and I just started coughing and sputtering, and I had to spit them out and bat all of the other leaves that were near my face all the way away. I was underneath a pile of them, both my head and my body. That wasn't even all though. The bottom half of my body had been buried in the shallowest pit of dirt I had ever seen, literally around a foot deep maybe, if even that. The dirt had just been piled on top of me, and it looked like a dog had done it. I managed to pry my hands free from around my back after a short amount of time. I still felt very dazed, and it was difficult to walk in a straight line. My nose had been bleeding while I was asleep, and it had pulled and clotted near the bottom of my nose, and there was dried, crusted blood all over my top lip. I did the only thing that I could do in that moment. I stumbled all the way home. I honestly thought that my parents would be worried sick, waiting outside the home for me, and that maybe they would have called the police to come out searching for me, and that they would protect me from whatever person or thing I encountered. I had never wanted anything more in that moment than to hug my mother and just cry. But the only thing waiting outside of my house was a mountain of police cars and uniformed officers. I had never seen so many in one place at one time before. It seemed like an odd amount of them for a person who had probably only been missing for a few hours at most. Maybe it was longer, I don't know. My perception of time was all messed up. I shouted out and asked what was going on. I only realized at that point that my boots had been taken off of my feet, and I also was not wearing my sweater anymore. In fact, seeing the police right there in front of me like that, I panicked and worried about having my gun on me, only to be reminded that I left it behind. So now I was double panicking. When I shouted out, it took only a few seconds before I was being swarmed and was face down in the gravel with weapons pointed at my head. I was screaming and sobbing, just asking what was happening, but they were not giving me any answer at all. I asked them if I could see my mom and dad because this was not right, and one of the officers spat onto the grass near my head and then just said, "You sick fuck." Before long, I heard footsteps coming down the gravel, and then I heard my little sister's voice. She was screaming at me through tears and snot, and I could barely understand her because she kept taking these really deep, intense breaths after every few words, like she was desperate to breathe and could not hold it back, like it was automatic. She was calling me evil, telling me she hoped I would rot and die in prison. I could barely see out of the corner of my eye that another officer had to restrain her and pull her back towards the ambulance that was there because she was trying to get close to me. I did not learn much of anything until the first interview down at the police station and after speaking with my lawyer. I don't want to complicate things, so I will keep all of these parts brief, but just know that in real life, it was not as simple as I make it out to be here. I was being arrested under suspicion of murder of both of my parents. I felt like I was hit by a mountain of bricks when I heard those words said out loud to me. I broke down. I didn't know how to respond or to even keep going. I tried to protest my innocence, but let's just say that my lawyer was not really inclined to believe me. I wanted to represent myself, but I was advised against it very heavily. I told him my story word for word, and he told me that I needed to take things seriously. He told me that if I mentioned that again to a jury, then I would be put away immediately. He was advising me to plead guilty in order to get any small amount of leniency that I could, but I refused. Why would I plead guilty when I know I did not do anything? That case just completely ground to a halt at points, or at least, that's what it felt like. I have no idea why. Looking back with the evidence that they had, or that they thought they had, because like I said, it was not me. It felt like that case should have been over in a flash. I obviously was not given bail for such a serious crime. I want to skip over most of the court case. I had to sit in a court behind glass with a guard right next to me while listening to my sister recount something that I knew I did not do. She said that I came into the house smelling really bad and acting strangely. She said that both my mom and my dad were shouting at me about something, and so she came down the stairs partially, only just enough so that she could see what was going on, but she was still in the darkness of the stairs. Apparently, I stood there not really responding all that much, and then things got physical. My father said he was going to beat me and punish me for not taking things seriously, for being a bum and a leech. I apparently held my hands out away from me to keep my father back, and I kept yelling out, "No, no, don't do this." And once my father continued and slapped me, I said, "No, no, not supposed to happen, leave me." My father apparently grabbed me by the neck, and my sister said that these next events happened so quickly that she barely even had time to process them. 1 second, my dad was standing with his hands around me. The next, my sister just hears this really loud bang that made her ears go fuzzy and made her hear a high-pitched ring. I had shot my father in the stomach with my Ruger, the Ruger that I took with me into the woods. It was registered in my name and traced back to me. They would obviously have had all the history of the purchase and could track it back for records. It would have had my fucking fingerprints on it. But I wasn't there. It wasn't me. I was still in those woods, and I know that I was. She said that my father had this horrible shocked look on his face, and she could see the color draining from it as he stumbled backwards. My mother started screaming and running to my father as he laid down on the floor, and when she did, I took another shot. It caught her in the neck as she was bending down, and she bled out very quickly. My sister had to grab her own mouth in order to stop herself from screaming, and she tried to hide herself further up the stairs in the darkness as quietly as she could. She said that she could hear me muttering underneath my breath. She said it sounded like I was saying, Why, he was family." And then a few minutes later, she heard a door slam shut. Only then was she able to run downstairs and use the landline phone to call the cops. I got emotional, and I had a bit of an outburst in court that did not help with my popularity. I started screaming how that wasn't me and how it wasn't possible, and I had to actually be physically dragged out of there. When it was my turn up on the stand, I completely ignored my lawyer's advice. I tried to tell the truth about how I was attacked in the woods and could not possibly have been there. Whenever I tried to bring up that person, that thing who pretended to be me, my lawyer would interrupt me and try to shut it down. He told me that he was doing me a favor. I got life in prison. My lawyer told me that I was lucky that there was no death penalty, or that I was not put away in the nut house for the rest of my life. I guess they figured I was just a kid trying to make up a stupid story in order to get away with things, or because I could not really comprehend or come to terms with what I did, rather than me being a mentally deranged person. I spent 30 years in that prison. I would write letters to my sister, begging for her to come and visit me, so that I could properly explain what happened, and so that I could let her know that it was not me. I went over the memory in my head again and again and again, so that I could write down my side as accurately as possible. She was all that I really had left. I didn't really have any other family, at least none that were close to me. I did not want her to hate me and abandon me. After the first two, the mail had begun being refused, and I was informed that I could not write to her anymore. I kept writing, but I kept the letters underneath my bed, thinking that maybe once I got out, or that when she came to visit me, I could give them to her in person. The only thing keeping me going at all was me imagining her reactions to my letters, imagining her believing me and forgiving me. I had a lot of horrible, traumatizing experiences in that place that I had to compartmentalize, but that is not what this story is about, so I do not want to bring them up. I could not get parole for a long, long time. They kept on denying me until around 2019 when I finally got out. I was quiet and as cooperative as possible in prison. I did not make a peep, I did not do so much as raise my voice. I figured it was the only way. I'm not exactly doing well. I can't get a job. I can't do much of anything. It took me forever to even figure out this posting online kind of thing. Technology is so different now. The world is so different now. I missed out on so much. It's like I stepped into an alternate reality when I finally stepped outside. I found out that my sister passed away from an acute heart failure back in 2010. It really broke my heart to find that out. It took a lot of digging to figure this out, because I basically had no family left, and those that were left wanted nothing to do with me. I just don't know what happened to me that day. I wish I never went into those stupid woods. I don't know what that thing was or what it even really wanted, but I can still remember the damn thing and the way it changed right in front of my eyes. I have thought about that experience every single day of my life, morning and night, while I was behind bars. Even now, I want nothing more than to just give my mom a hug and cry. I'm pretty used to not being believed by other people, so I do not blame you if you think I'm full of shit. I just hope that maybe even just one of you might understand.